Captain Jacob Harris stood in the observation deck of Station Centauri, looking out at the stars beyond. He had waited his entire career for this moment. As humanity's first official representative to the Galactic Council, he carried the hopes of billions of people on his shoulders. But right now those shoulders felt very small. The station itself was enormous, a massive structure that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. It housed thousands of alien beings from dozens of different worlds, all of them seemingly much larger and more powerful than him. Jacob pressed his hand against the cold glass and took a deep breath. He had studied the alien species for months before arriving. He knew their names, their strengths, their weaknesses in theory. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of standing among them. A Krell warrior walked past him in the corridor, and Jacob had to step back to avoid being crushed. The alien barely noticed him. To these beings, Jacob was just another small creature in a vast galaxy. His escort, a robotic AI named Unit 7, guided him through the winding halls toward the council chamber. The station was a marvel of engineering, with corridors that seemed to go on forever. Jacob saw creatures of all shapes and sizes moving about. Some had multiple limbs, others floated in special gravitational fields. He saw beings made of crystal, others that seemed to be pure energy contained within a suit. The diversity was overwhelming. The council chamber itself was breathtaking. The ceiling stretched high above and the walls glowed with soft blue light. Large chairs were arranged in a circle, each one designed for a different species. Jacob was led to a small platform in the center. He stood there, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. He was human-sized while everything around him was built for much larger creatures. The council members began to arrive. First came the Krell, a massive warrior species covered in thick armor-like skin. Their leader, Vorath, was enormous, standing nearly 12 feet tall with powerful muscles rippling across his body. He had 4 arms, each one thick as a tree trunk. Behind him came the Shannara, elegant beings with long limbs and graceful movements. They had skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Minister Lyra was their representative, and she looked down at Jacob with what might have been curiosity or pity. He couldn't quite tell. Next came the Elthir, smaller than the Krell but still significantly taller than Jacob. They had large eyes and seemed to communicate partially through telepathy. Counselor Vex was their speaker, and he looked at Jacob with an expression that seemed amused. Finally came the Valorians, represented by Crystalline Shard, a being made entirely of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it in beautiful patterns. Jacob greeted each of them formally, using the diplomatic protocols he had memorized. Vorath gave a response that sounded like a low rumble mixed with laughter. Minister Lyra nodded politely but said nothing. Counselor Vex tilted his head in a way that suggested he was listening to something no one else could hear. Crystalline Shard's response came as a series of harmonic tones. The council began discussing the conflicts in the Outer Rim. Entire worlds were being fought over. Resources were scarce and tensions between different factions were rising. They talked about needing military contractors, beings willing to fight in dangerous situations. Jacob listened carefully, waiting for his moment to speak. When they finally asked about humanity's intentions, Jacob stood up straight and spoke with confidence. He told them that humanity wanted to contribute to the galactic community. He explained that humans were capable fighters, intelligent strategists, and reliable partners. He offered humanity services as military contractors, ready to help protect the Outer Rim colonies. There was a moment of silence. Then Vorath made a sound that was clearly laughter. It echoed through the chamber, and several other council members joined in. Jacob felt his face flush with anger, but he kept it hidden. Minister Lyra spoke first, her voice smooth and diplomatic. She suggested that humans might be better suited for administrative work or scientific research. Her tone made it clear she was being generous with her assessment. Counselor Vex added his own thoughts, noting that training soldiers took many years. He pointed out that humans had short lifespans compared to most galactic species. It would take decades to properly train a human soldier, and by then the human would be nearing the end of their life. It seemed inefficient to him. His comment was delivered without malice, but it struck harder than any insult. He was right in a way. Humans did live shorter lives. Jacob felt something rise up inside him. He was not going to accept this dismissal. He was not going to let them reduce humanity to a joke. He looked each of them in the eye and challenged them to allow humanity to prove itself. He requested a combat evaluation. He wanted to fight their best warriors in the arena. He wanted to show them what humans were truly capable of. The council seemed surprised by his boldness. They exchanged glances, and it was clear they found his confidence amusing. But Vorith agreed, seeming to enjoy the thought of watching a human attempt to fight against truly powerful beings. They scheduled the evaluation for the next day in the station's main arena. Jacob left the chamber with his head high, but his mind was racing. He had just challenged the most powerful military figures in the entire known galaxy to combat. He had maybe 20 hours to prepare. Most humans would have been terrified. Jacob was terrified too, but he had learned long ago that fear was not something to run from. Fear was something to acknowledge and then set aside. That night Jacob sat in his quarters and prepared himself. He cleaned his ceremonial sword, a weapon passed down through his family for generations. It was made of steel, ancient design, simple but effective. He reviewed combat techniques, studied the weaknesses of each alien species, and meditated on what was at stake. This was not just about him anymore. This was about whether humanity would be taken seriously in the galaxy. He thought about Earth, about all the people who believed in him. He thought about the soldiers who would follow him if he proved that humans belonged among the stars. He thought about future generations of humans who would look back on this moment and know whether to reach for the stars or retreat to their homeworld. By the morning, Jacob was ready. He did not know if he would win any of the fights ahead, but he knew that he would fight with everything he had. He knew that humans had something the other species did not fully understand yet. They had an unbreakable will to survive. They had the heart of warriors, and today he would show them exactly what that meant. The morning light filtered through the windows of Jacob's quarters as he woke from a light sleep. He had not rested well. His mind had been too active, running through different combat scenarios and strategies. Today was the day that would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars or would be relegated to the sidelines of galactic affairs. He dressed in the combat suit they had provided, a standard-issue garment that adjusted to his body size and temperature. It felt foreign against his skin, but he was grateful to have any protection at all. Unit 7 guided him through the corridors toward the main arena. The station was more crowded today than it had been before. News of the humans' challenge had spread quickly through the station. Thousands of beings from different species had come to watch. Some came out of genuine curiosity. Others came because they expected to witness something humorous, a small human being defeated by warriors far more powerful. The arena itself was a massive circular chamber with viewing galleries rising on all sides. Jacob estimated that at least 10,000 beings were already seated in the stands. The noise was tremendous. Different species made different sounds, and together they created an overwhelming cacophony. Some beings whistled. Others made clicking sounds or deep rumbling noises. A few communicated through visual displays of light and color. Jacob walked out onto the arena floor and the noise increased. He could hear laughter mixed with other sounds he could not identify. On the opposite side of the arena, a gate opened and his first opponent emerged. It was Grontak, a Krell warrior. The alien was massive, standing nearly 10 feet tall. His skin was dark and thick like natural armor. He had 4 powerful arms, each one rippling with muscle. His face had a cruel expression, as if he was already bored with this fight before it had even begun. Jacob took a moment to assess his opponent. Grontak was larger and stronger, that was obvious. But Jacob had studied Krell physiology. He knew that their arms, while powerful, had vulnerable points at the joints. He knew that their thick skin was designed for protection against energy weapons, but it was not invulnerable to precision strikes. Jacob had spent the night studying these details, committing them to memory. The referee, a neutral robot with no allegiance to any species, stood between them. The robot announced the rules of combat. The match would end when one opponent could no longer continue, or when they surrendered, or when 15 minutes had passed. It was a simple format, designed to test both strength and endurance. Grontak began to move forward slowly, almost leisurely. He did not even raise his arms into a defensive position. He was so confident in his superiority that he barely bothered to prepare for combat. The crowd laughed. This seemed to be exactly what they had expected. Jacob did not wait for his opponent to attack first. He moved forward quickly, using his smaller size to his advantage. He was faster than Grontak, and he used that speed. He struck at the Krell's left shoulder joint, the place where the first arm connected to the body. He used all the force in his small frame, driving his fist into the sensitive area. Grontak grunted in surprise. That was all. It was not a sound of pain, just surprise that the human had managed to land a blow. The crowd's laughter faded slightly. Jacob moved again, this time targeting the right side. He struck at another joint, the place where the lower right arm connected to the torso. Again, he used his speed and precision to compensate for his lack of raw strength. Grontak began to take the match more seriously. He raised his arms and tried to grab Jacob, but the human was too quick. Jacob ducked and weaved, moving in patterns he had rehearsed over and over the night before. He was like a dancer flowing around the Krell's massive frame, but Jacob knew he could not maintain this indefinitely. Grontak was too powerful. Eventually, the Krell would connect with one of his attacks and Jacob would go flying. So Jacob changed his strategy. He began to focus more intensely on two specific areas. He repeatedly struck the nerve clusters on the inside of Grontak's arms, targeting the points that would temporarily disable his limbs. After several minutes of concentrated strikes, Grontak's left arm went limp. The Krell's expression changed from amusement to anger. He roared, a sound so loud that it vibrated through the arena. He came at Jacob with renewed intensity, using only 3 functioning arms. The human had managed something that no one had expected. He had actually hurt the Krell warrior. Jacob moved back, trying to maintain distance. But Grontak was faster now that he was truly fighting. One of his massive hands caught Jacob on the side and the human flew across the arena. He crashed hard into the wall, feeling the impact in his bones. The air was knocked from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, struggling to breathe. The crowd went wild. Some cheered for Grontak, expecting this to be the end. But Jacob pushed himself up. He had been hit harder in his life.
He had trained for this moment his entire career.
He was not going to give up now. He charged back toward Grontak, and this time he used a different approach. He moved in close, using his small size to slip under the Krell's massive arms. He grabbed onto Grontak's body and began striking at the nerve clusters again, more aggressively this time. He was no longer just trying to show skill. He was fighting with everything he had. Grontak's second arm went limp as well. The Krell now had only 2 functioning arms and was growing frustrated. Jacob could see in the alien's eyes that Grontak was beginning to understand something. The small human was not going to be defeated easily. But as the match continued, Grontak's raw strength and experience began to tell. He managed to grab Jacob with both his functioning arms and threw him again. This time Jacob could not get back up as quickly. His body was exhausted. His mind was beginning to slow. The referee called for the match to end. The 15 minutes had expired. Jacob had not won, but he had not lost either. The match was a draw, which was remarkable considering the size and power difference between them. The arena fell silent for a moment, and then the noise erupted again. This time it was not laughter. It was something else. It was surprise mixed with a grudging respect. Vorath was watching from the observation deck, his expression unreadable. Minister Lyra was leaning forward, her elegant features showing genuine interest. Counselor Vex seemed confused, as if his calculations had been wrong. And Crystalline Shard was humming, a sound that seemed to indicate satisfaction. Jacob limped back to his corner of the arena, breathing heavily. He was battered and bruised, but he was still standing. More importantly, he had proven something today. He had proven that humans could fight at the highest levels of galactic combat. It was a beginning. A small one, perhaps, but a beginning nonetheless. The days that followed were the most grueling of Jacob's life. After his first match against Grontak, the council had decided to continue the evaluation. They wanted to see how Jacob performed against different types of opponents. Each day brought a new challenge, a new warrior from a different species. Each day Jacob entered the arena knowing that he might not walk back out. His second opponent was a Shannara warrior named Kessian. The Shannara were elegant and graceful, very different from the Krell. Kessian moved like water, fluid and smooth. Jacob expected speed more than raw strength. The match lasted only 8 minutes. Kessian's grace and agility proved superior to Jacob's. The human was defeated quickly, but not before landing several decent strikes that surprised the Shannara warrior. The third match was against a Valorian enforcer, a being made of living crystal who could harden his body to incredible densities. Jacob's strikes had no effect. He spent 15 minutes essentially being battered around the arena until he could no longer stand. The crowd found this highly entertaining. Their laughter was deafening. But something strange happened after each defeat. Jacob would recover, bandage his wounds, and return the next day ready for another match. He won some fights through clever tactics and superior positioning. He lost most of them through sheer physical disadvantage. Yet in every match, he showed something that the aliens were beginning to notice. He showed an unwillingness to quit. After a week of continuous combat, Jacob was covered in bruises and cuts. He could barely move without pain. Medical drones from the station attended to him, treating his injuries with alien technology that he did not fully understand. But he refused to stop. He would rest for a few hours and then return to the arena for another match. The mockery, however, had not stopped. If anything, it had grown worse. The other species had begun to view Jacob's persistence not as impressive, but as foolish. They saw him as an entertaining diversion, a small creature that kept trying despite being hopelessly outmatched. Jokes circulated through the station about the human who thought he could fight like a real warrior. Some aliens made bets on how many matches Jacob would survive before he finally gave up. On the 8th day, Jacob was summoned to observe a council gathering in the observation deck. He was exhausted and every step caused him pain, but he went anyway. Perhaps they had made a decision about his evaluation. Perhaps humanity's fate in the galaxy was about to be determined. The council chamber overlooked the vast expanse of space. Stars stretched out in all directions and various ships moved through the void in the distance. Jacob stood in the center of the chamber, while the council members arranged themselves in their positions. He expected to hear a formal verdict, some announcement about humanity's status in the galactic community. Instead, what followed was a discussion about humanity's place in the galaxy. But it was not the discussion Jacob had hoped for. Vorath spoke first, his deep voice filling the chamber. He said that humans were interesting but ultimately too weak to be taken seriously as warriors. He noted that Jacob had won only 3 matches out of 8. A real warrior, according to Vorath, would have won at least 6 out of 8. Minister Lyra added her thoughts in her smooth, diplomatic voice. She suggested that humans might be better utilized in support roles. Perhaps they could handle logistics or administration or scientific research. These areas did not require the physical capabilities that combat demanded. Her tone was not cruel, but it was dismissive. She was essentially saying that Jacob had failed. Counselor Vex tilted his head in his usual contemplative way. He spoke about human genetics, about how humans had not evolved for combat like the species around them. He noted that humans had soft skin, weak bones compared to galactic standards, and a cardiovascular system that was simply not designed for the kind of stress that true warfare demanded. His assessment was delivered in academic tones, but the meaning was clear. Humans were fundamentally unsuited for military service. Jacob stood there listening to the council members explain why his entire species was inadequate. They spoke about humans as if they were not standing right there in the room. They discussed human limitations with the certainty of scientists discussing the properties of inanimate objects. There was no malice in their words, which somehow made it worse. They were not angry at humans. They were simply unimpressed. Then Cassian stepped forward. The young Shannara warrior, who Jacob had fought several days earlier, had been listening to the entire conversation. His expression was arrogant, his posture relaxed. He looked at Jacob with contempt in his eyes. Cassian said something in his native language, and several council members laughed. Before Jacob could ask for a translation, Cassian walked directly toward him. The Shannara warrior moved with deliberate slowness, clearly intending to be threatening. When he reached Jacob, he pushed the human backward with casual ease. Jacob stumbled but did not fall. Cassian pushed him again, harder this time. The warrior said words in the galactic trade language that Jacob understood perfectly. Cassian called humans primitive apes from a backward world. He said that humans were a joke, that allowing one to participate in these trials was an insult to every true warrior present. Cassian was clearly looking for a reaction, trying to provoke Jacob into doing something foolish. But what happened next surprised everyone in the chamber. More aliens began to gather. They formed a loose circle around Jacob and Cassian. They were laughing, cheering, clearly enjoying this confrontation. They began to encourage Cassian to hit the human again. They called out to Jacob, mocking his weakness and his inability to stand up to a real warrior. Jacob felt something inside him shift. It was a deep and profound change, like a door opening in his soul that had been locked for a long time. He had come to this council in peace. He had offered partnership and cooperation. He had fought with honor against opponents far stronger than himself. He had endured defeat after defeat without complaint, and for all of this he received mockery and contempt. The laughter continued around him. More and more aliens gathered, sensing that this was becoming entertainment. They pushed closer, their various forms of bodies pressing in on Jacob from all sides. Cassian stepped closer, preparing to push the human once more. Jacob looked at each of their faces. He saw their certainty, their absolute confidence that humans were nothing, and he realized that words would never convince them otherwise. No amount of diplomacy or reasoned argument would change their minds. They had already made their decision about humanity's place in the galaxy. They had decided that humans were beneath them. Jacob took a deep breath. He looked around the circle at the aliens who were laughing at him, at his species, at everything humanity had accomplished to reach this point in space, and then he turned and began to walk away. The aliens laughed even harder, taking his retreat as proof of human cowardice. But Jacob did not walk away because he was defeated. He walked away because he had made a decision. He was about to show them something they had never seen before. He was about to show them what happened when you pushed a human too far. He was about to show them the difference between a warrior who fights for advancement and a warrior who fights for survival. Jacob walked toward the exit of the observation deck with measured steps. His body ached with every movement, and his mind was filled with a clarity that he had never experienced before. Behind him, the laughter of the aliens continued. They saw his departure as an admission of defeat, another confirmation of human weakness. They did not understand what was actually happening. Jacob had not decided to flee. He had decided that the time for negotiation and peaceful demonstration was over. He moved through the corridors of Station Centauri with purpose. Other beings stepped aside as he passed, some calling out insults or mocking comments. Jacob ignored them all. His destination was his quarters, a small room that had been assigned to him when he arrived at the station. He entered the room and immediately went to a locked storage compartment. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was his ceremonial sword. The blade had been in Jacob's family for generations. It was made of steel, folded and refolded 1,000 times during its creation to give it superior strength and flexibility. The handle was wrapped in leather, worn smooth by the hands of warriors stretching back 200 years. The blade itself was beautiful, with patterns running through the metal like rivers of darker color. It was not a weapon designed for modern warfare. It was something far older and far more meaningful. It was a symbol of human martial tradition, a connection to every ancestor who had held it before him. Jacob pulled the sword from its wrapping and held it up to the light. The blade caught the illumination and seemed to glow. He had brought this weapon to the station as a symbol of peace and cultural respect. He had never intended to draw it in actual combat, but now everything had changed. He strapped the sword to his side and began walking back toward the observation deck. His walk was different now. His posture had changed, something in his bearing had shifted, and several aliens he passed seemed to sense it. A few moved out of his way more quickly than necessary. When Jacob reached the observation deck, the gathering of aliens was still there. Cassian was telling a story about something, clearly enjoying the attention and laughter of the crowd. The Shannara warrior was describing human weakness in exaggerated terms, making movements that were meant to mock the way humans fought. But when Jacob entered, the noise began to fade. The aliens noticed his return. More importantly, they noticed the sword. Cassian stopped his story mid-sentence. The young Shannara warrior's expression changed from arrogance to confusion. He looked at the blade with what might have been curiosity or concern. The other aliens began to back away slightly, creating more space. A Krell observer made a sound that might have been a warning. A Valorian's crystalline form seemed to shimmer with intensity. Jacob did not say anything. He simply walked through the crowd toward Cassian. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword. The laughter had stopped completely now. The observation deck was silent except for the soft sound of Jacob's footsteps. Cassian tried to maintain his arrogant expression, but Jacob could see fear beginning to creep into the Shannara warrior's eyes. The young alien took a step backward. Jacob continued forward. The crowd parted further, creating a clear space between Jacob and his antagonist. Jacob's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but carried through the entire chamber. He said that Cassian had been right about one thing. Humans did come from a small world, but that world had taught them something that the Shannara and the other species in this chamber had perhaps forgotten. Humans came from a world where every day was a struggle for survival. Humans came from a world where weakness meant death, and strength meant continued existence. Jacob drew his sword. The blade sang as it came free from the sheath, a high, clear sound that echoed through the chamber. He told the gathered aliens that humans did not fight for pride or for advancement or for glory. Humans fought because their species had learned that the alternative to fighting was extinction. Humans fought because survival was more important than comfort or reputation. Cassian tried to move away, but Jacob stepped forward quickly. The Shannara warrior realized that running would only make him look worse. He drew his own weapon, a modern energy blade that hummed with power. The two warriors faced each other across the expanse of the observation deck. What happened next shocked everyone present. Jacob moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for a being his size. His sword was not as technologically advanced as Cassian's energy blade, but it was centuries old and had been wielded by warriors far greater than this arrogant Shannara youth. Jacob's strikes were economical and deadly, each movement calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum wasted motion. Cassian tried to defend himself, but he was not prepared for the ferocity and skill of his opponent. The Shannara warrior had never fought someone with genuine intention to defeat him. He had trained, yes, but always against opponents who pulled their punches or who were limited by the rules of arena combat. This was different. Jacob fought with every ounce of skill and determination that his years of training had provided. He fought with the knowledge that this moment would determine whether humanity was respected or dismissed. He fought as if his entire species depended on the outcome of this single confrontation. Within seconds, Jacob had disarmed Cassian. The Shannara warrior's energy blade flew from his hand and skittered across the floor. Cassian stood there, defenseless, his arrogance completely shattered. He fell to the ground, his elegant form sprawled across the polished surface of the observation deck. The chamber erupted, but not with laughter. Aliens began shouting in different languages. Some seemed angry. Others appeared impressed. A few looked genuinely frightened. Jacob stood over Cassian, his sword still held ready, his breathing heavy. Vorath stepped forward, his massive form moving through the crowd. The Krell warrior's expression was unreadable. Jacob tensed, prepared for the worst. But Vorath simply stopped in front of him. The two warriors, the human and the alien, looked at each other for a long moment. Then other warriors began to step forward, not to attack Jacob, but to acknowledge what had just occurred. A Valorian warrior approached Jacob and made a sound that might have been respect or recognition. An Elther observer sent out pulses of something that felt almost like approval. Minister Lyra called for order, her voice cutting through the chaos. She announced that combat in the observation deck was prohibited, and that the area needed to be cleared immediately. Security drones began arriving to separate the gathered aliens. But something had fundamentally changed in that moment. Jacob had drawn his sword not because he wanted to fight or because he sought glory. He had drawn it because he had reached the limit of his patience with mockery and disrespect. And in drawing that blade, he had communicated something to the alien species that no words could have expressed. He had shown them that humans had limits, and when those limits were crossed, humans would fight back with everything they possessed. As the crowd dispersed and Jacob was led away by security, he did not feel victorious. He felt something deeper. He felt the weight of responsibility for his entire species. He felt the knowledge that this moment would be remembered and discussed throughout the galactic community. And he felt the beginnings of something that the aliens had not expected from humans. He felt the beginning of respect. Security took Jacob to a holding area in the lower levels of Station Centauri. They did not arrest him or place him in confinement, but they made it clear that he was not free to leave. Jacob sat in the room and waited. He cleaned his sword carefully, removing the microscopic traces of energy residue from Cassian's blade. He wrapped the weapon back in its protective cloth and placed it beside him on the bench. Hours passed. No one came to speak with him. No one explained what would happen next. Jacob used the time to rest and think about what he had done. He had violated protocols. He had drawn a weapon in a place of peace. He had defeated one of the council members' own representatives. By any reasonable standard, he had committed a serious offense. But Jacob did not regret his actions. He had reached a point where words and demonstrations and peaceful negotiations were no longer enough. The aliens had made their decision about humanity based on their preconceived notions of strength and weakness. The only way to change their minds was to show them something they could not ignore or dismiss. He had done that. Finally, Unit 7 arrived with instructions to bring Jacob back to the council chamber. The robot did not speak, but its mechanical movements indicated urgency. Jacob followed the android through the corridors of the station. Many beings stopped to watch him pass. Some seemed curious. Others appeared concerned. A few nodded in what might have been acknowledgement. The council chamber was different now. All 5 council members were present, along with several other high-ranking officials from different species. The atmosphere was tense. Jacob could feel the weight of expectation in the air. This was a formal hearing, and his future in the galaxy might be decided in the next few moments. Vorath spoke first. The Krell warrior's deep voice filled the chamber as he explained the council's initial position. He stated that Jacob's actions in the observation deck had violated station protocols. He noted that the human had drawn a weapon and engaged in combat outside of the designated arena. Such actions could not be tolerated. The council had to maintain order and structure, but then Vorath's expression changed slightly. He continued by saying that he had also observed Jacob's combat demonstration against Kessian. He acknowledged that the human had displayed remarkable skill and determination. The Krell warrior admitted that he had underestimated humanity. He had assumed that humans were weak because they lacked the physical size and natural weapons that other species possessed. Vorath said that he had been wrong. Minister Lyra added her thoughts. The elegant Shannara diplomat explained that the council had made an error in judgment. They had evaluated humanity based on physical capabilities alone and had ignored other important factors. She pointed out that Jacob had demonstrated tactical intelligence, adaptability, and a quality that the aliens struggled to define. She called it resolve. It was something deeper than mere courage or bravery. It was a fundamental refusal to accept defeat that seemed to be a core part of human nature. Counselor Vex spoke in his measured academic tone. The Elthir official presented data and analysis that he had compiled over the past week. He noted that Jacob's win rate in arena combat had actually improved as the week progressed. More significantly, Jacob's opponents had also improved in their assessment of the human threat. By the final matches, warriors who initially saw Jacob as an easy victory had begun to treat him with caution and respect. Counselor Vex then addressed the incident in the observation deck. He explained that his initial calculations about human lifespan and training time had been based on a flawed assumption. He had assumed that humans would approach military service with the same motivations as other species. But humans, according to Vex's analysis, approached combat with a different mindset. Humans fought for survival and for loyalty to their group. This gave them a different kind of strength, one that could not be easily measured or quantified. Crystalline Shard emitted a series of harmonic tones that Unit 7 translated into words. The Valorian council member expressed something close to enthusiasm. Crystalline Shard had observed Jacob throughout all of his combats and had noted a consistent pattern. With each match, Jacob had learned and adapted. He had developed new strategies based on his observations of his opponents. This was the mark of a true warrior, according to the Valorian perspective. Not someone who relied on innate strength, but someone who relied on intelligence and adaptability. The council then presented their formal decision. They voted unanimously to grant humanity official status as a military contractor within the Galactic Alliance. Humanity would have access to advanced weapons and training programs. Human soldiers would be permitted to serve in defensive and offensive operations throughout the known galaxy. More importantly, humanity would be recognized as a legitimate member of the galactic community with all the rights and responsibilities that such status entailed. Jacob listened to the announcement with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had succeeded. Against overwhelming odds, he had managed to change the minds of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. More than that, he had proven something fundamental about his species. He had shown that humans were not to be underestimated or dismissed. The council members then made a remarkable gesture. They each approached Jacob and offered him a formal gesture of respect. Vorath extended one of his powerful arms and Jacob gripped it in the human tradition of a handshake. Minister Lyra bowed slightly, her elegant frame moving with practiced grace. Counselor Vex touched Jacob on the shoulder in a gesture that transcended species boundaries. Crystalline Shard hummed a complex tone that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple words. Jacob was escorted from the chamber by Unit 7. As he walked through the corridors of Station Centauri, he noticed that the other aliens treated him differently now. Some moved aside to give him space. Others nodded in greeting. The fear and contempt that had characterized his earlier days on the station had been replaced by something else. It was not quite friendship, but it was respect. He returned to his quarters and immediately sent a message to Earth. He contacted Captain Anderson of the Earth Defense Force and informed him that humanity had been granted full military contractor status in the Galactic Alliance. The news would take months to reach Earth through regular communication channels, but it would arrive eventually. Jacob then stood at the observation window of his quarters and looked out at the stars. He thought about the millions of humans who would follow him into the galaxy. He thought about the soldiers who would serve in the military forces that were about to be established. He thought about future generations of humans who would look back on this moment and know that their ancestors had fought for the right to stand as equals among the stars. The sword that hung on the wall of his quarters had done more than defeat one arrogant alien warrior. It had opened a door for an entire species. It had proven that humans belonged in the galaxy, not as support staff or researchers, but as true warriors and partners in the galactic community. The news of Jacob's success spread through the galaxy faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within days, ships from dozens of different worlds began arriving at Station Centauri. These were not diplomatic vessels or research ships. They were military recruitment teams sent by various factions and organizations looking to hire human soldiers. The message had been received loud and clear. Humans were warriors worth investing in. Captain Anderson of the Earth Defense Force arrived on the station 3 weeks after Jacob's triumph. He came with a team of military specialists and strategists who were tasked with establishing humanity's first official galactic military division. Anderson was an older man with gray hair and a weathered face that showed decades of service in Earth's military forces. He had led battles on 3 continents and had trained thousands of soldiers. But even he seemed impressed by the scale of what was about to unfold. Anderson met with Jacob in a private chamber to discuss the next phase of the mission. The older officer explained that Earth's leadership had already begun the process of selecting and training the first battalion of human soldiers to serve in galactic operations. These would be humanity's finest, drawn from military forces across all the continents of Earth. They would be equipped with the best technology that humans currently possessed, supplemented by advanced alien weapons and armor that the Galactic Alliance was providing as part of the partnership agreement. Anderson told Jacob that he had been promoted to the rank of Major and would command the first human military division to deploy in the Outer Rim conflicts. The promotion came with enormous responsibility. Jacob would be responsible not only for the success of military operations, but also for how humanity was perceived throughout the galaxy. Every action his soldiers took would shape the reputation of their entire species for generations to come. Jacob accepted the promotion with the understanding that this was far more than just a military rank. He understood that he was now an ambassador of sorts, representing not just Earth but the entire human species. He would need to prove that humanity could be trusted with serious military responsibility. He would need to show that humans could follow orders, work effectively with alien species, and conduct themselves with honor and integrity in the chaos of warfare. Over the next weeks, Jacob worked closely with Anderson to establish training protocols and operational procedures. They studied the conflicts in the Outer Rim, learning about the different factions and their motivations. They reviewed reports of previous battles and analyzed what strategies had proven effective and what had failed. They prepared documentation and training materials that would help human soldiers adapt to working alongside alien warriors. The first batch of human soldiers began arriving at Station Centauri. They came from different nations and different military traditions, but they shared a common pride in their species and a determination to prove that humanity deserved its place in the galactic community. These were professional soldiers, men and women who had trained their entire lives for combat. Many of them had served in conflicts on Earth before volunteering for galactic service. Jacob oversaw their initial training and orientation. He taught them about the alien species they would be working with and fighting against. He explained the different combat styles and weapons they would encounter. He shared his own experiences in the arena, telling them about his victories and his defeats. He explained that the key to success was not just physical strength, but intelligence, adaptability, and an unwillingness to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. The soldiers listened intently to every word. They understood that they were part of something historic. They understood that their actions in the coming battles would determine whether humanity would be accepted as equals in the galactic community or relegated to secondary roles. They trained harder than they had ever trained before, pushing themselves to the limits of human physical capability and beyond. News from Earth continued to arrive on regular schedules. The entire world was watching the developments at Station Centauri. Jacob was featured in media broadcasts across all human nations. He had become a symbol of human potential and determination. Schools on Earth were naming buildings after him. Children wore shirts with his image. The story of how he had faced the mockery of the aliens and proved humanity's worth was told and retold across the entire planet. But Jacob did not allow the fame to distract him from his mission. He remained focused on the practical realities of preparing human soldiers for galactic warfare. He worked with alien military trainers, learning their combat tactics and teaching them about human approaches to warfare. The aliens were gradually beginning to understand that humans had legitimate strengths and perspectives that were worth considering. 3 months after Jacob's confrontation with Kessian, the 1st Human Military Division was officially activated. It consisted of 500 soldiers, the most that could be transported and equipped in the available time. They were divided into smaller units, each one led by experienced human commanders. The soldiers wore a uniform that combined human military tradition with new technology provided by the Galactic Alliance. They carried weapons that represented the best of both human and alien engineering. A formal ceremony was held on Station Centauri to mark the occasion. Representatives from dozens of alien species attended to witness the birth of humanity's galactic military force. The human soldiers stood in neat formations, their bearing and discipline impressing even the most skeptical observers. When Jacob stepped forward to address them, the entire assembly fell silent. Jacob told his soldiers that they stood at a turning point in human history. He said that every action they took in the coming battles would reflect on their entire species. He told them that they were not just soldiers fighting for military objectives. They were ambassadors for humanity, proving through their actions that humans deserved respect and recognition in the galaxy. He ended by saying that humanity had survived and thrived for millennia on Earth, by demonstrating courage, intelligence, and an indomitable will to overcome obstacles. Now, he said, they would demonstrate those same qualities to the entire galaxy. The soldiers cheered. The sound was powerful and unified, a display of human determination that rippled through the chamber. Even some of the aliens seemed moved by the moment. The Human Military Division was ready for deployment. Weeks later, the first human soldiers saw combat in the Outer Rim. They were assigned to defensive operations, protecting colony worlds from raids and attacks. In their first major engagement, human soldiers fought alongside Krell warriors, Shannara pilots, and Valorian engineers. The battle was fierce and desperate, but when it was over, the human soldiers had proven themselves to be effective combatants and reliable teammates. They suffered casualties, as all combatants do, but they also inflicted significant damage on their enemies. Reports of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. Humans had fought well. They had held their positions, covered their allies when needed, and demonstrated both bravery and tactical intelligence. The reports also noted something else. They noted that human soldiers showed a willingness to make personal sacrifices for the mission and for their fellow soldiers. This quality seemed to inspire and strengthen their alien teammates. Jacob stood in the command center of Station Centauri, reviewing reports of human military operations across the Outer Rim. His soldiers were serving with distinction in multiple theaters of conflict. Some had been decorated for bravery, others had been promoted for demonstrating leadership capabilities. Slowly but surely, humanity was earning its place among the galactic powers. He thought back to that moment in the observation deck when he had drawn his ceremonial sword. He thought about the mockery and contempt he had endured. He thought about the determination and sacrifice that had brought humanity to this point. And he understood that this was just the beginning. Humanity had proven that they belonged in the galaxy. Now they would need to prove that they could be trusted partners and formidable allies. Jacob picked up his sword, still wrapped in its protective cloth. He looked at the blade and thought about all the warriors throughout history who had held weapons similar to this one. They had fought for their families, their nations, and their survival. Now their descendants were fighting on worlds that ancient humans could never have imagined, but the spirit was the same. The determination was the same. The refusal to accept defeat was the same. Jacob placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and made a silent promise to his ancestors and to the future of humanity. He promised that humans would continue to prove their worth in the galaxy. He promised that they would do so with honor, with courage, and with the understanding that they now represented not just themselves, but their entire species. And he promised that the mocking laughter of the aliens would eventually turn into respectful recognition of humanity as a force to be reckoned with among the stars.